All right, and yes, as you can see, I have a very close association with the Lovasco family. That's Tico the cat. That's Tico the cat, and it was not in the middle of nowhere. It was on Highway 94, and I jumped across like 3 lanes of traffic. And I know we didn't make it a campaign issue. I tried. And no, I'm just teasing. And although I do want to say thanks to Tony and Ava. In fact, we had a very candid moment, I think, in how marriages work a few minutes ago. While Alex was winding down her speech, I leaned over to Tony and I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "Hey, do you think we should turn the lights on?" And he turned around and he goes, "Eh, pay attention, Senator." And just then, Eva, came up to his side and said, "Hey, I think we should turn the lights on." And he popped right up out of that chair and got those lights on right away. So, very candid moment. Thank you to Tony. Thank you to the both. What a great night. I was, when I come to events here where we're talking about liberty, I tend to see the same folks showing up. I see Paul Kurtman. I see Austin Peterson. In fact, I've seen Austin Peterson show up to more events than any other candidate for U.S. Senate. So I can tell you he's making good on the promises that he's talking about working hard. And Paul, Paul was one of the first guys that I talked to and got to know when I was in getting involved in the political spectrum. And I can tell you, I've still got a lot to learn from Paul because, here's a guy that's been preaching and practicing what he talks about in the legislature for the past 8 years. So I think we're in very good company. And one thing that I always heard, and with much relief, I am not running for anything. So I'm very happy. And never, believe me, radio stations and television stations are happy along with me that I'm not. But, one of the things I do hear in campaign season is the reality of candidates always stand up. They get on TV or they get on campaign speeches and they say, "This is the most important election that we've ever had." How many times have we heard that, right? This one right here is the most important one. And what's funny is next election, that one's going to be the most important election that we've ever had. Going back to the past 20 years, as long as I've been voting and paying attention to politics, more or less, it always seems like every election is the most important one. And I always kind of joke when I hear that as part of a campaign speech. But then it kind of hit me once I was in office. The reason I'm always hearing that is because it's actually true. And the reason that it's true is that in every single election, we find ourselves in a scenario where we've never had more government than that election. We find ourselves in a scenario where we have never spent more of your money, whether it's in St. Charles County or Jefferson City or Washington, D.C. We've never spent more of your money than in that election. And unfortunately, and I say this with a certain measure of cynicism, by the time the next election gets here, we'll set new records for how much of your liberty the government has taken from you. And so when I see an opportunity to support a candidate like Tony, I take that opportunity because there is a long history, regardless of party, where folks are saying one thing in the campaign season and then going down to their respective centers of power, be it St. Charles, be it Jefferson City, wherever, and doing something entirely different. I'll give you an example. We recently passed the state budget for fiscal year 19 in the Missouri Senate. We will spend a record amount of your money. I had actually when I voted on the budget bills to come before the Senate body this week, I had actually a really simple calculation of whether or not I was going to support these budget bills. I took a look at the budget bills, and if those budget bills were spending more than last year, more than the rate of inflation, I took a look at what the additional money was being spent on, and if I couldn't identify how that was in the best interest of what government ought to be doing with your money, I voted no. Very simple, very simple. And I ended up, I think just by that simple standard, I ended up voting on, of the 13 budget bills, I voted on 5 or 6 of them. 5 of them I voted no on. And when I voted no on those, without exception, the vote totals were they would pass by a margin of 32-1 or 31-2. I was in that small of company to apply a very simple metric for whether or not we should be supporting all this government spending. And yet if I come back to a room like this outside of the Missouri Senate chamber, and I suspect that many of you may have been right there with me in spirit, wanting me to apply that standard to how we do business. Am I right about that? So this goes back to, who are we sending to these centers of power? Well, Tony and Ava, I've known Tony and Ava as long as I've been involved in politics, and that has been a lot less than how long they've been active in our community. And I've come to know them not just as a great place to send a stray kitten, if you find one on the side of Highway 94, and you risk life and limb to save that poor, cute kitten. But they've always had a certain brand about them. And their brand is that the government doesn't know what to do with your freedoms or your money as well as you do. And if you send more people like Tony to public office, there is a point, I believe, that we can reach that the message that you all that have brought you here tonight will break through, and for once, we can actually make good on the campaign promise of rolling back the size of government and rolling back on the tramplings of your freedoms. And if we don't support Tony, then the next election will be the most important election of your life. Amen. But I think that we can do that here. I think that we can make a stand, and I'll tell you what I've also learned in Jefferson City is that when folks think of St. Charles around Missouri, we are seen as one of the most successful, prosperous counties in the entire state. And I'll tell you what, we didn't get there, and we didn't get that brand because we pursued the kind of policies like they're pursuing in St. Louis City, where we spend more and more money on bigger and bigger programs, and we stifle economic freedoms and religious freedoms and other freedoms to a degree that everyone wants to leave. Guess where they're coming? They're coming right here to St. Charles. And as Arkin County continues to grow, we're going to need people that understand the proper role of government in exactly the same manner that Tony understands it, because if we don't, then we're going to lose those freedoms, and the people that are moving here will leave here for other greener fields. So I want to thank each of you tonight. One, I want to thank you for being here. Believe me, as a candidate who had a very exciting primary myself, an election myself just a couple years ago, I can't tell you how much it means to see so many people that are willing to spend a Sunday night coming to spend time to answer trivia questions and eat a lot of food, which is sometimes bad for me, but that's okay. Secondly, I want to thank you for your financial donations. There's no campaign I can think of that can win exclusively on energy alone. And although Tony's got the right message, and he's got all the willingness to work hard like he needs to, he needs the financial donations to provide the foundation so he can get his message out. Because the folks that want to take away your freedoms have a tremendous amount of money. And we don't want them to drown out the right messages. We've got to give Tony a fighting chance. So I want to thank you for your financial donations. And the last thing I want to thank you for is, is your prayers. You know, a lot of times, in my election, we spent, I think we set a record amount of money that we spent in a state Senate primary. And I spent a year and a half knocking doors, raising money. And on election night, in 27,000 votes cast, I won by 400. So you can bet that the most decisive thing, I believe in my heart, that actually got me over the finish line was nothing of this earth. I believe it was the prayers of all my supporters of different walks of life that got me over the finish line. And I'm thanking you in advance for offering those same things for Tony, because even if it's not whether or not he wins, it's also taking care of him and Ava as they go on what is a very difficult journey for anybody that puts their foot on the path to public service. And I want to thank you in advance. Tony's a great candidate. I am thrilled to endorse him. I think we're going to see him not only serve as a great council member for St. Charles County, I think you'll be hearing his name further than that some point in the future, because the message of liberty and the message of less government is the winning message. Help us work with Tony to give him the right tools he needs in addition to that message so he can make a great councilman for you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.